Greetings and salutations, ghouls, ghosts, and gozers, and welcome to the spookiest month of the year. Maybe not this year, because every month this year is spooky. My name's Nick. I'm joined here by Alister.
Hello.
Alister, introduce yourself.
Hello. I'm Alister Rivas, and I'm just here to tag along for the ride.
So, I feel every time October rolls around, I always find myself looking towards horror movies, simply because there are a lot of horror movies that I have missed over the years. Most notably, that I didn't realize that I'd missed until most recently, is I don't think I've actually seen The Exorcist.
Ooh,
like the original one. Exorcist. And I feel like if any time is the best time to just catch up on these old classic flicks,
October would be the time, huh?
It might as well be now. Do you think there's any classic horror movies that you might have found yourself going past?
Oh, definitely. Definitely, because I kind of used to stay away from horror just because the genre was so played out. But obviously recently with Blumhouse Productions and all these, A24 doing Hereditary and all of these movies coming out, it's revitalized the horror genre. So yeah, now there's an excuse to go back and be like, okay, where did all this come from? And where's it going to go?
A24 especially has been doing some incredible films, such as Hereditary, as mentioned, The Witch, Midsommar, again from the same director as Hereditary. But Blumhouse also has a lot of interesting. They have their own interesting styles. A24 is more like horror as drama, and Blumhouse seems to be taking like a more casual approach to horror, especially like with movies like Happy Death Day, and from the same director, now they've got another movie coming out called Freaky with Vince Vaughn.
I'm not quite sure what that one's about, but I definitely agree that A24 definitely has more of a dramatic thriller type approach, whereas the Blumhouse, I feel, is sticking more to the classic formula of the low budget, but I think everyone realized that they have to start crafting a story. You can't depend on the teenagers in the woods, doing drugs and having sex anymore. So that's great.
We've had too many years of Saw films, which were no plot and all murder. Too many years of Paranormal Activity, which were very slow-paced found footage.
Oh yeah,
like we actually need
trend was so annoying.
We actually need characters.
Oh yeah, character development, all that stuff. I mean, even sometimes I think So I found out the director's name, Ari Aster, who did Hereditary and Midsommar. I think what they also realized, as well as Blumhouse, was that atmosphere counts, and you have to build, in order to build atmosphere, you need to take people to a place. So, but in terms of recommendations, my recommendation actually doesn't go in that direction at all, of these kind of high caliber directors and productions.
Before you keep going, I'm just going to say that before you keep going, I just want to say that one of the things that I want to do with this podcast today is I want us to recommend one horror movie. Like, I feel like if you had to pick one horror movie you think everybody should watch this October, continue.
All right, so in terms of my recommendation for a Halloween flick, well, I have been following this actress, Zoe Lister-Jones, for a little while. And I started following her way back when I started watching Whitney Cummings' NBC show, Whitney. And I thought she was funny, just followed her because I thought, interesting, talented, wanted to see what else she was doing. She popped up in a couple more things. Not a lot of noise for a little while. And then all of a sudden I start seeing on her Instagram, oh, big things to come, so excited, oh, working on stuff. I was like, oh, great. I can't wait to see what's going on. Nothing for a bit, and then a day or two ago, this trailer comes out. Written and directed by Zoe Lister-Jones. And it's The Craft. What is it called specifically? Resurrection?
The Craft Legacy.
The Craft Legacy.
I admit, I have not seen either the original Craft, original The Craft, or this new version.
So, I would highly recommend the original Craft. Because I remember watching it as a kid, kind of too young to watch. All-female cast. I remember my mother loving it. We always used to watch, what is that show? Charmed. And all these crazy fantasy witchcraft things, And there used to be kind of a superstition, and hocus pocus used to be big in the 90s. With things like X-Files and stuff. And this kind of fit the genre where, if you are doing something you shouldn't be doing, if you take things too far, there's some bad juju behind it. And, it felt real. It felt dark. It felt... it's not so much a horror movie as it's a witchcraft movie about learning your lesson and maybe not picking on the new girl and stuff like that. But I would highly recommend The Craft. It gets very spooky, some great performances. So that would be my Halloween recommendation. What
when
about
you say
Nick?
that when you say that it's not so much a horror movie, can you expand on that? What do you mean by it's not so much a horror movie?
So, the movie doesn't have any blood or guts or anything like that, but it does have mysticism and voodoo and karma and stuff like that. Things that are more inner challenges, inner conflicts, and they are like, oh, Jason's coming to get me, oh, huge slasher thing, and yeah, it's very exciting, very compelling. There's some great performances by, and I'm going to butcher her name, Fairuza Balk, who is an amazing actress, and I think is really shines through in this role. Fits perfectly. I mean, they even use her image in the Craft Legacy trailer. She's in there, so she's a very strong icon for the movie. Yeah, super fun.
I kind of want to go back to, like, you say that it's not necessarily horror for the reasons because it doesn't have that visceral imagery. But what exactly, like, has horror kind of almost defined itself as that kind of, like, excessive violence, that blood, that guts? Like, on one end, you've obviously got movies like The Thing, where you have people's arms being bitten off. You've got, like, flesh turning inside out. But, like, on the other hand, like, think of movies like The Sixth Sense. Like, would you define it still as a horror movie, despite the fact that there might be less blood in it than most action films?
Something like The Sixth Sense, I think, can be scary, but I definitely think it's more of a thriller, this mind-bending suspense thriller, with obviously the Shyamalan signature at the end,
And then I would also kind of add on, like, is horror imagery meant to repulse you physically or affect you mentally?
I think horror is one of those things where it's kind of like pornography. It's gratuitous.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot.
It's gratuitous.
It's gratuitous. Yeah.
I thought you were going to use a different. I thought you were going to use a different line where, like, I forget what the quote actually goes, but it's like, How do you define what is pornography? You need to see it first.
Oh yeah, you need to.
Like, how do you?
If I see it, I'll know.
If I see it, I'll know it.
Yeah.
But
Which
like,
I don't think so. I think there's a kind of a definition for something like pornography, horror, at least in the sense that like I don't think you have to see it and know. I think gratuity is one of the main features of it, and then you just pick where you're aiming at. Are you talking about blood and guts? Or are you talking about boobs? Sometimes at the same time, because I think what happens is horror and death and blood are one of these base instinct things that humans have. That's like, okay, killing, death, competition, like fighting, red, passion, and it's carnal, I guess is a good word for it. One of some of these carnal feelings that people have, base instinct. And so once you have one, you're getting to the climax of something or trying to keep people interested, you throw in another, it's within the same kind of theme or motif, and it's heightening the situation because now you're just piling. And so I think that's where we got some of the whole, well, it was also the 80s Freddy and Jason and stuff like that,
They had to up the ante not only against each other, but also against their previous films.
Exactly.
Like, Freddy Part 2 had to be more violent than Freddy Part 1, because what are you selling?
Mm-hmm. People want more. But yeah, so that's my recommendation. Go see The Craft. It's, I don't know, if you're like a 12 to 17-year-old girl or boy that's about to have some kind of weird Halloween sleepover, get your Ouija board, get your candles, light as a feather, stiff as a board, have that sleepover, pop that VHS in the way we used to do it. And,
sorry, I only have the laser disc.
And enjoy.
So, like, the reason why I kind of, like, hit up, like, those questions in regards to, like, how do you define horror, is because my recommendation, there's a very specific scene in that movie that sticks out with me. And that is a scene where you're looking at this video footage of this crew that came before the main characters. And everything seems up and up until one of those characters takes off his shirt, and underneath you see his stomach. And just underneath the skin, bulging up against it, there's this writhing, almost like worms, almost like eels. Oh, and it's just like... And there's no blood. I guess there's plenty of guts, but they're still encapsulated. It's that image of horror. It's that, like, this is not what it should be, being contextualized so visually. Yeah, and that scene is from the movie Annihilation.
Oh.
I enjoy space horror, although space horror has kind of devolved a little bit over the years, especially with, like, Alien 3 and then Alien versus Predator. And then, Alien versus Predator 2.
I would think it kind of devolved in the sense that, like, even Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence get a space horror movie. A movie I didn't see.
Is that a space horror movie?
And whose name...
Or is that like space romance movie?
I don't remember. I think it's trying to be a little bit of everything. Space exploration, horror, romance. You got two big stars. You gotta cover all the basics for the biggest demographic. But I think it's a space horror because it's one of those, we're lost in space situations. We both woke up before we were supposed to. What are we gonna do? And then you have all your fun, and then you're like, we're still here. Then it starts devolving. Once again, I didn't see it. I assume it was crap.
Yeah, it looks like the popcorn version of Moon. Like if Moon was really dumb.
A version of space horror that's actually high caliber.
Yeah. Although, the Moon is definitely the higher caliber. And then, but, I still remember there was the movie Event Horizon, which worked for what it wanted to do. Like, it was still kind of dumb, but it was effective. It got the job. It got the job across. Whereas Annihilation is itself very unsettling and very smart.
Yeah, very smart. You'll have to refresh me on some of the plot. I do remember the scene you're talking about with the writhing worms in the gut. And that's
it's very stark imagery.
Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot more movies should do more, or have learned to do more. Was that
more body horror,
and you don't necessarily want to see the full gushing everything. You know, they should take you right to the edge of comfort and then pull you back, because they didn't show the worms bursting out of his stomach and crawling all around. You know, that's slightly unbelievable, good amount of CGI, this or that. But when you just see them peeking out from the edge of the skin and you see them under there, that's enough to be like, okay, I'm out, you know?
And that also kind of leads into like my critique of a lot of those movies, where like, have you seen Saw 3?
I believe so.
Unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because that was awful. But like that movie is especially an abuser of this, in which there are no injured people in horror movies. Nobody gets injured and lives, generally. Most people, at any time they take an injury, it's probably, or an injury that's there's no like step in between life and death.
No. If you're an antelope and you know you got a weak leg, you're out, man. Like that lion's coming to get you.
So like there's one scene in Saw 3 where this guy's hooked up to like a horribly intricate contraption, which is going to twist each of his limbs around in like a 360, like one after the other, and then finish off with his neck. But like once it twists around the first limb, like you know that it's going to finish its way around.
Yeah.
You don't need the story to be like, oh, but he's still got 3 more limbs and a head. Like they're going to save him. No, he's going to be dead. And that's something missing out on like the body horror that you see in Annihilation, where he is technically still alive while whatever is happening inside of him is happening.
Yeah.
He is it's like the entire idea of like being eaten alive by wolves or something. You will be alive when they start to eat you. And that is also its own sense of horror. But the plot of the movie is there's essentially this kind of bubble that's appeared out of nowhere, yes. And people have been sent in, but no people have come out.
A shimmering bubble, yes.
And again, I did not think about it when I made the recommendation. An all-female cast.
All-female cast.
Goes into the bubble to find out what's going on. With horror that is thematically kind of picks up off of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see a little bit of that theming in the beginning of the movie, where Natalie Portman's character is reading a copy of the book, the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is an actual book about an actual person who died in the 50s, but her cancer cells are still alive today.
Whoa. Well, that's crazy. And you're going to have to refresh me on kind of the whole Annihilation plot, because I remember seeing it, but it was so long ago, and I think it was also around the time Arrival came out.
Yeah,
so
Arrival kind of came out of about
that.
Like, that was a pretty good year for just space horror.
Yeah, space horror type
But
movies.
no, like, so like they go through this is a recommendation time, Alister. I can't just refresh you on the whole plot.
That's right. I'm gonna have.
This is your assigned viewing in October. You and the listeners.
Well, I'll go see Annihilation
because it is an amazing film,
and get back to you so you can finish your recommendation.
And I shall watch The Craft.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, however, we watched temporal horror.
Oh, yeah.
In the form of the massively confusing Tenet.
Blah.
It wasn't by Hans Zimmer this time, so you didn't have the blah.
Well, you still had it, because I think...
You still had loud noises.
Oh my gosh, so the sound design is a huge part of this movie. But yes, you still had the drum explosions, and I think, well, do we want to open up with our... I don't know, I have a little opening on the movie. Do you want to go first?
Go for it. If you've got an opening, hit it up.
Okie doke. So, blah. Christopher Nolan's big, beautiful, massive spy thriller heist of a Terminator movie. That's how I'm characterizing it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I like it.
It was crazy. It looked great. It was beautiful. It was big, IMAX big. There wasn't as much science as usual. He only kind of explains his weird world-bending, time inversion plot device thing. And I didn't really know what was happening most of the time. But it kind of didn't matter anyway. It was big. It was beautiful. It was a masterclass in how to use IMAX. I mean, in terms of filmmaking, you could tell that Christopher Nolan was having fun. He was doing what he wanted to do. But boy, did it cost him. Not really a great time.
Though, here's the thing that I would ask later on, even though I'm kind of posing the question now, is like, would Warner Brothers look at... It was produced by Warner Brothers, was it?
Yeah, it was Warner Brothers.
Would they look at the failure of the box office as an issue with the movie or an issue with COVID? Because, like, the movie itself is not kind of roaring with praise.
No, but I do think that they came into this knowing it was just going to be a Nolan feature. They essentially told him he could do what he wants after Batman. I mean, he did just kind of have another one of these in Dunkirk, but Dunkirk was so much like... It was big, but it was also smaller in terms of, like, locations and scope and stuff. This was a very big movie. Very big.
And also, like, with Dunkirk, though, like, Dunkirk was cut up and shown to you at different points in time and different locations. But looking back, you can kind of assemble those pieces together.
Oh, yeah.
Memento is a movie that's shown in reverse, but you can kind of your brain can look at it and say, "Hey, this is the order the scenes went in, and that's how they fit together." Whereas I'm still not entirely sure if characters at the end of the movie are where they're supposed to be because of the film's story requiring characters to move forward in time and backwards in time and sometimes existing at the same times as their other selves. So...
Right. Well, I do have what I'm hoping is kind of a mind-blowing spoiler prediction for the end, but I'll save that for the end. But yeah, so that was my general thoughts on Tenet. What about yours?
It was big. It was loud. I had no idea what was going on. It felt like a video game that decided to offer characters very little exposition in between levels. And the actual structure of the movie barely seemed to exist. We seem to be moving from one conflict to the next in a speed that feels more like they took a full season of a TV show and then crushed it down to like 3 episodes. but still wanted to hit all of the plot points, which meant very little character development, very little plot development, and it's all about, okay, this is what we want to do now. This is where, and we're just doing it. We don't have time to explain to you how it works. We're just going to do it right now because we don't have time. We've got places to go.
Yeah, the movie was racing the whole time. Like, even when we were standing still and, like, quote unquote resting, we were still like, you know, but we don't have that much time to rest. We got to make sure to, you know.
Because there's always some movement. Nobody's just kind of like has time to like have a conversation to explain how things work. And that's something that's interesting to think about, especially with Inception. Like, Inception is a very complicated movie, but you have multiple characters that exist entirely so that the viewer can understand what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
Ellen Page's character exists entirely so that she can ask questions like about how it works.
Yeah, and then the audience
Joseph
can hear.
Gordon-Levitt exists just so he can explain things.
Yeah.
Heck, every character has their part where they're like, oh, by the way, this is how things work. Or they're asking questions how things work.
Yeah, in this one there was definitely a sense of like, okay, you're a Nolan fan. We're assuming you know who Christopher Nolan is. We're throwing you in here with not much explanation. The opening of the movie is maybe like 30, 45 seconds of waiting, and then all of a sudden there's a SWAT team just go, 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 and you're rushing in, and it begins. And you're tagging along. You notice there's a team of SWAT that isn't with the rest of the actual police department, because they have different Velcro tags that they just pick one and pop on, and then you know that there's something different about this heist. It's not just a heist, it's a time heist.
But that also kind of leads to tons of other questions, like, that never really get answered. Like, who was the main character even working for in that original scene?
Oh, yeah.
Like, why were they even... Who actually led them there? And that also kind of leads to the idea of what information did Christopher Nolan consider unimportant for telling the story.
Yeah.
Such as the main character doesn't have a name. In the credits, he's just listed as protagonist.
Just as the protagonist, that's right. Our protagonist runs into the room. Our protagonist has a fight down a hallway. Yeah, and he's the protagonist, and that's all we
And he also
really
refers to himself by said name.
We actually don't even know how he developed his set of skills. We don't know really where he's from. He might be CIA, but that could just be a cover. He ends up taking...
But, like, one of the things that I noticed in regards... like we both noticed in regards to the movie, is that all of the character development kind of goes towards the villain and his wife.
Yeah.
Like, you know more about their background stories and their histories. Even though, like, the wife's plot is kind of like your generic, kind of cliche, woman transcends abuse storyline.
Very modern day damsel in distress still. You know, I am in this abusive relationship. I can't get out. You know, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
But, like, even though that story does take some interesting twists and turns, and does have some interesting resolution by the time you get to the end of the film, like, your main characters, the people who you're spending so much time following around, you don't really know anything about them until the end of the movie. So up until that point, you're like, okay, but who is this guy? like Robert Pattinson's their character Neil is there throughout most of the movie, and like about halfway through the film, I was like, wait, how did he meet Neil again? Where did Neil even come from?
Yeah, there's a point in the movie where, and it's very noticeable at the introduction of Robert Pattinson's character, that Christopher Nolan's just going to be like, all right, we don't need this. There's a lot of hard jump cuts, where it's like we're talking about something and then bam, we're there. Why? Because you don't need to know the setup. You don't need to, you're already here. You're coming along for the ride. We're reverse bungee jumping up this building. Trust me, it'll work.
And although I suppose that is kind of the Nolan thing, like you look at Batman Dark Knight Rises, and there's the whole criticism, like how did Bruce Wayne get back to Gotham City after he climbed out of that hole?
Hard cut, that's how.
Hard cut to Gotham City.
Bam.
The magic of Hollywood brought him back home.
Yep. Yeah, and so Christopher Nolan, because the movie is racing so hard and has to get through a lot, it's a very dense movie, I feel like Christopher Nolan's just like, screw it, hard cut. You know, that this is all really just excess fat and this and that. Like, really, at the end of the day, what mattered, because the movie starts off big, right? You smash into this Ukrainian orchestra, and I think it's a little nod to Hans Zimmer. There's a very specific shot where there's a SWAT goon smashes a cello with his feet, and you see all these instruments broken, and the orchestra is all scared, and it's like, I think he's like, we're throwing...
Christopher Nolan definitely likes terrorizing orchestras.
Yes, and I feel like it's his way of being like, there's no Hans Zimmer this time, you know? It's like smashing the orchestra. It's like, we're changing up what you know. And then you're like, who is this? What's going on? Oh, there's bombs. We have to defuse the bombs. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Wait, but are you on their team or our team? Who are you? And then you get your first glimpse of the reverse time thing device with a bullet coming out of where a seat is mounted out of the stands, and it almost hits our protagonist.
Going reverse from the wall into the gun.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is in the trailer, the entire idea of catching the bullet.
Yeah.
By it going in reverse time. Which, for a second there, it made me think a lot about the movie Wanted, where it was all about like using your inner self, your inner belief that it works, causes it to work.
Yep.
Like there's no scientific principle that says if you twist your hand in this specific fashion, you actually have to believe it'll work in order for it to work. Like, I suppose, like a cross in vampire movies.
Right. And in this, I mentioned that there wasn't a lot of this wasn't Interstellar. There is no scientific explanation. There is an attempt at explaining, this is reverse entropy, which, if anyone knows what entropy is, it's just when time moves forward, like, things fall apart at a certain rate, you know, light and matter lose energy, and you can't reverse that necessarily. And so that's how you go forward in time, is these changes. Time is just change over distance, right? And so what our main character eventually learns once he, you know, gets recruited into whatever secret time heist thing Chris Nolan has set up, they just say reverse entropy, radiation. How does it work, he asks. And then the scientist in the lab goes, instinct.
Aliens.
Yeah, exactly. And they have this beautiful line, which is pretty crazy. There's two instances. This is like one of Nolan's most fanciful, most fantasy-esque movies. It's like I think It's like grounded in reality, as Nolan movies tend to be, but it has more suspension of disbelief than I think any of his other, pieces.
Because because you just have to assume what's going on works.
Yeah, works, exactly. Whereas, like, he was trying really hard in Inception to be like, no, first we knock you out, then we knock you out again inside of your dream, or in Interstellar, where it's like, well, if you get too close to the event horizon, time, space-time gets stretched so far that, 1 second is 7 years, blah, blah, blah. In here, he just goes instinct, and you can catch a bullet in quote-unquote reverse. There's a beautiful line that one of the agents says to him when he first gets recruited. He attempts to take a suicide pill. This might be a spoiler, but it's at the very beginning. He attempts to take a suicide pill, so he thinks he's going to die. He wakes up in a hospital bed, and he's like, oh, fake suicide pill? It's like, and then the agent says, yeah, it was really bad. So we rebuilt your mouth. And I just laughed because it's like, okay, so you put poison in him and you still destroyed his face, almost like that Bond villain. But then
from Skyfall.
Yeah, from Skyfall. But then you rebuilt his mouth, and it's a beautiful mouth. It's an A-list actor's mouth. Great. It's
they got it at the mouth store.
They just glaze over
buy
it.
all your mouth and jaws.
It's like, we rebuilt your mouth. Okay, fine.
Although, since you mentioned that, like, does that have any plot relevance?
So this is the thing. I think it's just a hint to the audience that, like, okay, slightly plausible, very exaggerated, right? And so from there it just escalates. Oh, we rebuilt your mouth. Oh, the science behind this is reverse entropy radiation, whatever. You have to go on instinct. And then, there's that line that the scientist says that he's like, so there's all these pieces that have the ability, because they have this radiation, to go in reverse. We just have to know which ones they are. What are they? Why are they here? Blah, blah, blah. And she goes, it's the detritus of a coming war. And I was like, damn, that's a fucking good line.
It also kind of feels like that kind of line would have led to a different story. Like, that different story meaning, like, there's some event that happens in the future that they have to stop, because that future event causes ripples in time that go both ways.
Right, forward and back.
And that would have been a different story,
I think,
than what we actually got.
I think that kind of is the story, but at the same time, like, this is the part where this is why I called it Christopher Nolan's Terminator. Because it's like, oh, there's a singularity that we have to stop because it fucks with our timeline.
But that's the thing, though, like, would it still fall in line with the Terminator? Because Terminators are trying to change the past, whereas they're trying to essentially change the future?
And so that's where it gets Nolan confusing.
And some of the things are happening in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And
because normal people are traveling forward in time, and then in the future, people have figured out a way to go backwards in time, but it's not traveling back in time. They literally go backwards through time, as in reverse through time. So while they feel, now, I wanted to bring up this scene as well, where our protagonist, after the orchestra SWAT debacle thing, he's getting beat up by some people. Who do you work for? This or that. He has this capsule in his mouth, right? The scene is set. First of all, it's kind of your first big IMAX scene. You have these trains.
Yeah. Seeing the protagonist man tied up on a chair in front of the train yard.
Yes, which is, huge movie history with trains, huge movie history with people being tied up on railroad tracks, right? But it's a nod to Einstein's train thought experiment, where it's about relativity. So basically, Nolan is introducing relativity, because Einstein's thought experiment was like, when you're standing at a station and you see a train go by, you see the train moving. But if you're in the train and you're going past the station, you see the station go by, right? And the only thing that tells us that it's the person on the train moving is that you feel the train rocking and the wind blowing and all these other cues. But if you were in the vacuum of space and an object goes past you, you see the object.
How do you know if you're moving, or how do you know if the object is moving?
So he introduces relativity in this great train analogy through the visuals and in this huge IMAX perspective where you can kind of almost feel the mass of the train through the sound design. They're just kind of creaking forward. On the right, one's creaking forward. On the left, one's creaking back. And he is right in the middle. This perfect symmetry, kind of.
So perhaps you can almost say that is almost a representation of the storyline itself.
Yeah, it's
time is moving forward, time is moving backward, and there's him in the middle.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like a visual representation of what we're going to see. So yeah, it gets very complicated, like you said, in terms of the storyline and the plot, when things are happening in the future, things are happening in the present, and things are happening in the past.
Things get complicated pretty fast when, not just that, but also when things start to happen where you just have to take an assumption that everybody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like when characters start going about their plans, even as early as reverse bungee jumping up a building, you just start to have to say, okay, I'll take whatever they know what they're doing, and that just carries on for pretty much the entire movie, because they spend so little time setting these things up.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what you said in terms of the video game play, where sometimes the video game's yelling a whole bunch of instructions and backstory at you, but you're like, oh, I didn't catch all of that. Well, whatever. As long as I follow the prompt and go to my next objective, I'll be fine. It's going to get me there.
I would argue, in regards to my TV analogy, if they had taken this movie and extended the storyline to a good solid 8-episode run, they would have been able to provide that foundation of character arc, that foundation of character development. So you would be like, okay, I know who these people are, so I have more of a reason to care about them.
Yeah, there was definitely, which I thought was, I think it was on purpose, but I thought would be revealed. I thought their arcs and their motivations and their personalities would be revealed later on, because I thought, okay, this whole time reverse inverse thing is going to, pay off somehow. So maybe them not telling us about these characters now, we'll learn about them once we've gotten done with all the exposition and all that stuff.
But in regards to that, there's almost no character arcs for the movie, as much as with the exception of the villain and his wife.
Yes.
To the point in which, characters don't really have arcs. They just have kind of flat lines that eventually kind of spike.
Yeah. In terms of our protagonist and his quote-unquote arc, I would describe it more of as a motivation.
Or is it more is more like an arc of understanding? It's less about who he is and how well he understands the concept.
Yes, because they're eventually, yeah, we do get the full. He does learn to accept the circumstances and be like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. But there isn't necessarily traditional growth in the character. Yeah. And I think it is weird. There is something said in the movie towards the end where the main character, the protagonist, and we haven't even mentioned, this is the actor John David Washington, Denzel Washington's son. Who
was excellent in the film.
Yeah, he was great. He was in Black K Klansman. He was great in that too. So, he's not just some celebrity's kid. He's got acting chops. He's got, he was cool. He was great in terms of when it came to action, acting, there was also all that. I don't know.
There's also Robert Pattinson as your Christopher Nolan stand-in, as you mentioned.
Oh yeah, smart blonde guy that says smart stuff. Yeah, the Christopher Nolan
suit, swept back hair,
has all the answers. Yeah, the Christopher Nolan surrogate in every movie. But in terms of the main character, John Washington, he starts off as a kind of our John Wayne, our Superman, our like strong, strong moral values. Yeah, what is the phrase? Strong moral core. In terms of our protagonist, our main character, John David Washington,
but does he really change that much?
No.
Like, does he not have a strong moral core by the end of the movie?
But that's the
thing.
Or
is like the only thing that changes is like his understanding of how the time concept works and where he fits in with everything.
Exactly. No, it's just the understanding, because he starts off as a strong, righteous person and just gets stronger and more righteous as maybe not even that much. He just is always a strong, righteous person. His character is basically chosen by whoever the CIA or whatever this group is because he's uncompromising in the job. He'll always get it done, and
you could say that the only character that actually has any character development in the movie is actually just the villain's wife.
Yes, and
because then after you get to the end of the movie, you realize the villain never really changed at all either.
No, yeah, the villain was always the villain the whole time. So we had that. The hero was always the hero the whole time. But there is something towards the end that they start discussing, and I forget who says it. It's that you're always the protagonist of your own story, but everyone's the protagonist of their own story. So some stories have multiple protagonists or something like that. The mention of these different points of views. So now Christopher Nolan is going, full 360 3D. This isn't just a circle. This is a freaking sphere. A three-dimensional thought thing of like forward and backwards time, but now forwards and backwards time with different perspectives, So where one person's their protagonist and you think we're only following John Washington, we're also following the villain's wife. We're also kind of following Robert Pattinson. We're also kind of following the villain. And so they all end up through, depending on what lens and perspective, becoming the protagonist of their own stories.
Now, I suppose that leads to the question, how much clarity do you think is necessary for the telling of a story? Is some amount of ambiguity, like, do you expect a movie to reveal everything?
Not always. I think it kind of sucks when you're in, like, a horror or a mystery, and it's like, we've been leading you down this breadcrumb, this trail the whole time, but no, it was, the stepwife, and you could have never figured it out. But I don't think Nolan does that. I think he has put in all the clues in this movie this very dense movie that there's no way you can catch what's happening.
Okay, so actually, then let me rephrase.
Mm-hmm.
Would it have been more important for like the viewing experience if you knew what was going on as it was happening?
I definitely think you have to attempt to follow along. I don't think you can just sit back and just like watch it all happen, because even there was a point even you and me turned to each other and we were like, okay, so this, and this, right? And you were like,
yeah, we were trying to construct theories as to we weren't trying to construct theories as to what things meant. We were trying to construct theories as to like
what was going on.
What were people actually doing at the moment and why?
Yeah, there's a lot of setup and execution in terms of like there's like 5 heists or something in this, and that's why I said the movie starts big and only gets bigger. So you think that like by the second or third heist, like this is the one, this is the heist that's going to catalyst us into the climax of the movie. And no, those were all just pre-heists that he jump cut, you know, all the exposition.
First, in order to bake this pie, you need to preheat the oven, and then you need to preheat the oven again.
It's like, no, you don't understand.
And then you need to preheat the oven a third time.
We're not just making one pie, we're making 4 pies in order to make this bigger pie. So
we're making 4 pies in this one pie oven at the same time.
But first we have to make 2 other pies and eat them so that we know how to make the 3rd and 4th pie to put in the ultimate 5th and 6th pie that will then be the metaphorical
the ultimate
7th
pie.
Yes. And yeah, that's what Nolan does. It's like, okay, in the first act there's like 2 heists or something. In the second act...
there acts? Are there acts?
There's kind of acts. There's like a beginning where we, you know, the orchestra, what is it? The opera house? Like
an unusual act structure.
Oh, yeah.
You would usually have like Act 1 introduces characters, sets up the plot. Act 2 muddies up the waters, and Act 3 is your resolution.
I definitely think that by the end of the weird bungee jump, that's the end of Act 1. Because
when you finally meet the villain, I suppose.
Yeah, because I think that's the last character to introduce before... Yeah, that's the last character to, like, introduce. And then from there, he starts gathering information to then, like, try to execute this stuff. Which there's a lot of intel gathering, which... is, you know, like sneaking into this, and you're like, okay, he did it. Are we moving on now to the, no, okay, he has to do another thing. Okay, they did it. Or is this the, no, okay.
Was that successful enough?
Right, so, and that's why Nolan has so many of these hard cuts, because he's just cutting out a lot of this, why we have to go here, or like, maybe he puts in why we have to go to this location and do the heist, but... all of the, okay, we're going to have this person and this team meet us here at this time with these supplies, and then we'll get out this way and that way, and he, like, cuts all of that out to just be like, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it, hard cut to kind of, like, you know, getting those things, or doing that stuff, or, you know.
Although, I suppose at that point, like, has the movie become too bloated with ideas, too, like, nobody's bothered to say, you know, maybe we should edit this down a little bit more. We need to clean up this story. Because, like, even movies like Inception and Interstellar with all of their... Like, Interstellar is this huge movie, but it's very focused on its gimmick. The entire idea of Interstellar is very focused. Gravity, time.
Mm-hmm.
Time is relative and is affected by gravity. And that, it propels you. That is everything you really need to know for the whole movie.
It's definitely a lot cleaner, and it is very much more focused. I think going into this movie, I thought this was going to be a lot more like Memento, where we're going to have a little of the present, a little of the past or the future, and then like mini collisions where it's like, oh, that's where that is. That would then propel us to the next act. where we would start at the bookends, meet in the middle, and then go, oh, that's what that is, and then go into the next act, chapter, whatever section. But it wasn't so much like that as it was straight.
You're just clinging on.
Oh yeah,
for the ride of your life.
Oh yeah, it's like, yeah, you're just racing through it until you hit this point in the narrative where it's like, okay, now we're going to go back.
Now we can see where things connect.
Yeah.
There are a couple moments where Nolan shows you where, okay, these are things that I didn't know what was going on. Now I can see the connections. So to kind of wrap up this relatively non-spoiler section.
Sorry, guys.
We ruined the first 5 minutes for everybody.
Oh, man. They rebuild his jaw.
Yeah, they've got some expert jaw rebuildings. Once you believe that they could just rebuild somebody's jaw, although you never really know how damaged it is, was there anything you wanted to... how did you actually feel about the movie? Did you like it? Would you suggest it to others?
So this is what I have.
Would you give it 2 thumbs up? Would you give it your lowest rating ever? 7 thumbs up?
I have 7 thumbs. I found some on the ground, which upped me from 5 to 7, so now I have more thumbs. But Christopher Nolan's Tenet. Yes, the big, beautiful, massive spy thriller heist of a Terminator movie. Beautiful. First, I want to talk about the IMAX, because we saw it in IMAX, and I think it was worth it. I definitely think you could tell what the IMAX intended shots were. It looked amazing. I cannot understate it enough. The locations... Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Nolan uses the IMAX format to make the world of Tenet larger than life. Sweeping landscapes, towering set pieces, beautiful color and composition with nods to famous art pieces, and the stunts. This man is crazy. The scale of this movie is just insane. It's IMAX in every aspect of what it does. I literally out loud, seeing some of the things that he put on celluloid, was just like, this is insane. I couldn't believe some of the size of the explosions, some of the scale of the stunts, the locations. I'm like, you went where? Like, the beautiful locations. And then even some of the nods to, like, the famous paintings. There's some paintings that are mentioned in the movie, many of which I don't know what they are, but there's definitely a nod to the girl in the pearl earring. I thought the actress who plays Kat, Elizabeth Debicki, who is the wife of the villain, is beautiful. Definitely was a model. Beautiful, excellent actress. Like, very sophisticated, very smart. Very believable. It was constantly racing, even in the parts where we were relaxed. It just constantly raced. This big, epic espionage caper of Nolan's. I'm sure with rewatching, it will tell a much bigger story, because, like we said before, sometimes you can't follow the stuff along. Nolan is such a good writer, director, and creator that I think he put it all in there. So just watching it over and over again, I'm sure is going to reveal a bunch of stuff that we missed. Now, it's not the best popcorn go out Friday night movie. I'll give you that. But it also didn't know it would have to represent the theater-going experience for the whole industry. So that's kind of, So this was a passion project of Nolan's. You can tell that. You can tell that 100%. We watch as he indulges himself on the film, the locations, the premise, the fantasy, and the complexity. It's like he created a really hard math problem just to see if he could solve it. $225 million of a blank check. of a math problem. And it shows. I think if you appreciate film, if you appreciate the craft, this is a maestro at work. The sheer effort in planning these shots, I mean, they're gargantuan. Some of these shots, just in terms of like, you have the reverse aspect that you have to worry about. You have the scale, you have the location, you have the IMAX 70mm film that you have to worry about.
Although I want to mention one thing. Like, you talk about the difficulty in regards to planning out some of those shots. If somebody gave you $255 million for your budget...
I mean, the thing is,
like,
it would take a Christopher
and you hired
Nolan,
the right
but that's
cinematographer
the thing. It's $225 million of confidence of do what you want. You're Christopher Nolan. You make it happen. You're Quentin Tarantino. You're David Fincher. You're gonna deliver. You know, it's a combination of skill and opportunity. Exactly. And after his track record, the thing is, Dunkirk didn't do so well. This one's, like, it's more palatable than Dunkirk. Dunkirk was a whole bunch of waiting. Which is the movie. Like, those soldiers on that beach had to wait, right? Dunkirk, like everybody was expecting a World War II movie, and what they got was an art movie. Yeah. And so this is Christopher Nolan, I think, playing with all his toys. You know, he's playing, I think this is probably the most IMAX shots. And they're huge, they're epic, they're beautiful. The color, the clarity, the scenes he chose, like, it shows on the IMAX screen, and it feels larger than life. The stunts, there's a stunt on the road with a fire truck and like a 18-wheeler or something. Just the movements and the coordination. And I don't want to get into this too much, but that final scene is just money thrown on screen, you know? So wrapping up here, so just the sheer effort of planning, just the sheer effort of planning those gargantuan shots. I asked myself how Nolan and partner Emma Thomas did it. It's a masterclass in filmmaking, not so much in story though. The plot becomes a little difficult and purposely fanciful, and there's already so much suspension of disbelief that you just got to go along for the ride because you know the movie will get you there. But though I'm sure in rewatches you could follow along. So Nolan is just that good. I think if you understand and appreciate the craft, you should definitely see it. If you're trying to have a good time with your friends and just kick back and, like, you know, eat some popcorn, it's not really the movie for it.
All right. That's fair. But your opinion is garbage. Tenet is kind of like my description of the movie Us. I enjoyed watching the movie Us. But when I walked away from the movie, I found myself asking a lot of questions about the details. Like with the movie Us, I enjoyed watching the movie. The performances were fantastic. The visuals were fantastic. But when I walked away, I found myself asking too many questions about the details that the movie did not necessarily provide. And I feel almost the same way with Tenet a lot more. Like, it is really enjoyable to watch. The action scenes are fantastic. The fight scenes are incredibly well choreographed. The visual cinematography is stellar.
It is amazing.
It is gold.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel as though the story could have been a lot cleaner. I feel as though this was written and nobody really thought to clean it up for the purposes of comprehension. They just try to like fit as much as they can into the story, and they said we'll figure out. Some people will figure out what it means later, and you can almost say that's something that's more about how we understand these kinds of films today. Like when Memento came out, you didn't have YouTube to provide videos that were like top 15 things in Memento that you might have missed. Memento ending explained. These days you have I would imagine that Christopher Nolan has an understanding that there are people who watch his movies to try to break it down. So, in a sense, it almost feels as though he created this puzzle box specifically so that fans of his could try to figure it out, to solve it themselves, rather than have a movie spend its time explaining how the puzzle box works. He knows that there are already people out there who are going to do the work themselves. So if he doesn't have to do the work, that saves him time in regards to the explanation, and he can just go into the big action scene. I honestly might not recommend the IMAX experience, though, because even though the visuals looked great, the audio mixing was not very good.
Really?
And there were plenty of times, there were several times in which the people's dialogue was drowned out by the noise and the music, and I'm wondering, people have their masks on, face masks on, going on, so they could breathe, and they're trying to talk to each other with that on, and
yeah, they do wear face masks in the movie, actually.
and that muffles their voice a little bit.
I might have to disagree with you in terms of just on the sound. I didn't think the sound mixing was that bad, although I don't think the first person to say that. It was a lot, and it was a little bit, I think it did start to verge on kind of parody of Hans Zimmer, because there was a lot of a drum explosion-esque just big sounds, but I did also kind of like that, because once again for me it was in a more immersive IMAX experience, and I like just feeling all the vibrations and stuff. But to each their own.
Although that's kind of goes towards the movie as a whole. The movie just pummels you. Visually, audibly, intellectually.
Yeah.
It just pummels you with all this different sensory information. Would I recommend watching it if you enjoy Christopher Nolan's movies? Definitely. But the caveat, I suppose, would be realizing what you're walking into is a puzzle box disguised as an action movie.
Mm.
And
very well said.
The box will not open up without effort, without work. Your viewing experience will depend entirely on both your efforts in maintaining focus on the plot and also your suspension of disbelief on making assumptions. You just have to accept certain fundamentals. You have to accept that certain things aren't necessarily going to carry themselves on a narrative front as much as you're examining them on a conceptual front.
Yeah.
The scene in which he's explained how catching a bullet works. It's not important to show you how to catch a bullet. It's important to show you inversion.
Yeah. They kind of throw away how it works for it exists,
And that's something I feel is almost missing in the movie, is there's a classic American film titled Dogma from Kevin Smith, where one of the characters, played by Jason Lee, who plays as a demon, goes into a person's house to take up residency and use that as his home base. Which once he gets in, the first thing he does is he cranks up the central air. There is no sin, no exquisite rapture greater than central air. And the camera zooms in on an air duct. And I watched the Dogma with the audio commentary, and Kevin Smith was commenting how in order to make it look like air was coming out of the vents, there are actually streamers on the vent itself, because he didn't know what he could do to portray air movement.
Right.
So with this movie, like, sometimes it's really hard to tell what's moving forward and what's moving backward, especially when it's moving around itself. And it can be confusing to watch. So as long as you have that fundamental understanding that you're walking into this puzzle box that requires a little bit of effort to break down, as well as that suspension of disbelief that you're going to take these assumptions and create a new reality based on these assumptions, then you will find a cinematic experience that is very, very well crafted, even if it is not necessarily the cleanest of narratives.
Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely think that the narrative storytelling portion falls a little short. I think entertainment value of this movie is kind of low, unless, you're looking at the craftsmanship, at the cinematography, at the kind of more spectacle, technical parts of the movie. Yeah.
So when we watch the movie, we purchase the tickets as a person might usually do upon entering a theater. But upon purchasing the tickets, essentially the seats around our individual chosen seat were blocked off.
Yeah, once you choose the
for
seats,
COVID.
There's a ring of safety that gets... You also get, the 11 other seats next to you as a protective barrier.
Not to mention the wearing of the face mask for the entire movie.
Yeah. Even though it was just you and me for a little while, and then towards the end of the previews, one other person came in and sat very far away from us.
I would sit very far away from us, too. He sat, all the way in the back. It was just the three of us in that theater at the time.
Yeah.
But, that experience of watching the movie, I remember watching movies with crowded theaters, every seat full. Do you expect that? When do you expect that to even show up again? Is that going to happen? Oh.
So it's weird because this movie was a huge, what is a phrase for a test thing? It's like sticking your toe in the water. It was a huge.
Let's say test. Test sounds good.
Okay.
That's a good word.
This movie was a huge test for...
A litmus test.
Thank you. This movie was a litmus test for the film industry because, Christopher Nolan, along with maybe other directors like Quentin Tarantino, hold this high regard for film, for cinema, for the movie-going experience, Scorsese. And so, who better to represent the idea of, hey, you got to get out of your house and go experience this. And it's become almost like a meme now, the way Nolan intended, the way the filmmaker intended, on the big screen, IMAX no less, with the speakers and the seats and the popcorn. And the thing that I think was missing was the community. Because I think that's a big part of going to the theater, is laughing with the people around you, jumping when everyone jumps at the same time, everyone, the environment. And
it's clear that litmus test failed.
Oh, yeah.
Because now you've got Warner Brothers delaying Wonder Woman till the end of the year. I just got a notification on my phone that says No Time to Die has been delayed till April.
Oh my God. I was just thinking about that movie because it's supposed to be Daniel Craig's last go at Bond. And so I was just thinking he was probably really excited for the premiere and all the congratulations and him to finally be able to kind of put his version of the character to rest and say thank you and take his last bow, which has now been delayed, if not taken away, by, the state of everything.
But at the very least, you can't make No Time to Die not exist.
Oh, no.
There are lots of projects that have been canceled due to COVID. There are projects that have been delayed due to COVID, like Robert Pattinson, star of Tenet, got COVID while filming The Batman. So that has been delayed.
Yeah.
My joke when they started talking about filming movies again was that now Jurassic World 3 was just going to fit, they were going to put hand sanitizers in the movie. There would be multiple scenes where Chris Pratt walks over to a wall. He's talking about something.
Just put some hand sanitizer on.
They put some hand sanitizer on. They're like, oh, hey, we need to go into this laboratory environment to examine some substance. It's very unstable, so you're going to need to put on this face mask.
And the rest of the movie is going to take place in this lab. See? Yeah, you could write yourself out of any hole.
And clearly, there are certain movies that obviously would work without having to worry about that. I believe there was a horror movie that was released on Shudder that is based on a Zoom conference call.
Oh gosh, oh yeah, I think I remember. But also Mulan. Mulan tried to hold off until it could come out in the theater because it wanted the big spectacle, the big event, a lot of the China-going audience to go see it, a lot of the American audience to go see it, and to just be a huge success. Unfortunately, they thought they waited long enough. They needed to get it out because, revenue and profits.
Because otherwise you're just sitting on these projects.
You're just sitting
on these movies.
And so they released it on streaming. Should Nolan have released his movie earlier on streaming? And I think the crux of this part of the podcast is the theater dead? Is the cinema as we know it, dead?
Well, people have been talking about the idea that the cinema is dead for a while now. When I went to watch the high-quality Oscar-caliber film Sonic the Hedgehog earlier this year...
Great success.
Huge numbers. But the theater I was in only had maybe a few people.
I think I had a good amount of people in my theater.
Yeah, I didn't watch it on the day of release.
Oh, I saw it was
a few
weekend.
It was a week or so later. Rise of Skywalker, I had a whole bunch of people. Rise of Skywalker, I went to see opening weekend, and that was still full. So the entire idea that theaters are dead, were dead, shall I say, before, might have been off and on depending on what was actually being made. Will this actually kill theaters now? It all depends on how fast this whole COVID can be beaten.
I think so.
And if it can't, then what's your favorite streaming service?
See, and so, yeah, that's the thing. It's so I understand there probably aren't that many 4K TVs realistically out there. Although in the next 5 years, I'm sure Sony and Xbox assume that they're going to start proliferating the middle-class, mainstream, whatever you want to call it. Sound systems are usually one of the last things people think about when you're making your quote-unquote home theater. You got the big flat screen, solid, you'll watch the game, whatever sound you got, is good, right? So not everyone's going for the Dolby 5.1 digital surround sound system with the sound bar and the subwoofer, blah, 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 55 watts, experience.
Blah.
Yeah, so that drum explosion is really going to sound more like a drum's firecracker. So I think the argument that Nolan is trying to make is, and I think a lot of other directors and creators, is the theater is a controlled environment where you know where your movie is playing, and you, as the creator and the director and the craftsman, have control over the audience's movie going experience. It's going to be loud. I want the sound to roll through them. This plane is going to look huge on IMAX. That explosion is going to be ridiculous, right? That's something you can control. Now, when you're watching a movie at home, the audience has the bigger advantage. It's comfortable. You can pause it. But quality kind of suffers. You can watch with your friends. You can rewind. But quality kind of suffers. You know, you can really only stream at 1080. If you have a disc drive, you can watch a movie on Blu-ray at like full 4K. Maybe they're pushing it a little higher now. That requires a 4K TV. What are your light settings? Do you have glare? Are you checking your phone? All these things. So in terms of a storytelling medium, I think the theater accomplishes something that is never going to go away, and that's the gathering around a campfire to tell a story. I definitely think it's going to take a drastic change in how it presents itself. I think the theater is probably only going to be available to the Avengers of the world, to the Thor Ragnaroks, to these big...
To the movies that get the big numbers.
To the big numbers, to your Fast and Furious type things, to these huge popcorn flicks, to your Jurassic Worlds. But they're not necessarily going to be there, at least for the mainstream, for your smaller movie, your more intimate narrative. I think that's where we're going to lose the theater. You know, because the gimmicks they've been upping the ante with 3D and smell-o-vision, the rumbling seats, and all that stuff that I guess is cinema. But, I don't know, I think when you talk to Scorsese, like everyone...
What can you do with sight and sound?
Yeah, what can you do?
Like, that's what Scorsese would be about. That's what, although Scorsese, like, considering Irishman went to Netflix.
Well, I think what he did was where Nolan went bigger on celluloid, Scorsese went bigger on time, and, what does Tarantino do? Tarantino just goes bigger on fucks and shits and feet.
He gets bigger on, like, we need to just have random dialogue that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the plot.
I think maybe he goes bigger on what we were talking about earlier, gratuity. You know?
Yep, yeah.
So, and those are all things that you can find exclusively in the cinemas, but now that, your streaming services are becoming more open to independent filmmakers and independent storytellers about different subjects, you can find those things on a much smaller scale, but I think people still want to see a well-crafted movie, whether it be narrative, cinematography, stunts, and I think the high risk of the theater justifies that high budget. You know, if you have a high budget movie, you're going to put it out where more people are going to see it. I don't know. It becomes an event at that point, but maybe, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I think to sum up the whole theater idea is, I think maybe there are going to be less movie theaters, less rooms I think there might be less rooms for the bigger movies and more rooms for the smaller movies. is how I would want to see it. You got 3 or 4 theaters for your 4 big summer blockbusters, but then I think there should be a reinvention of, now we got a lot more rooms that are a lot smaller, so you bring in some of that intimacy, and you play a larger variety of movies in terms of, we're playing Batman 1995, or Jurassic Park 1995, we're playing whatever movie from 2000, as well as some of the indie openers, and whatever, like, third-tier movie is opening this year. That way people, maybe it becomes more of a hangout spot, Sure, it might require in the beginning something more of a film buff or a cinephile, but I think if the theater ends up can create a culture of, come over here, watch a Back to the Future for an hour and a half, have an affordable meal or something, go back and watch another, like, throwaway something, Schitt's Creek or The Boys, and then, on a Friday night when you
what are you talking
funds,
about? The Boys is
Amazon.
The Boys
I know,
is
but
good
I'm
stuff.
saying I'm saying you bring stuff like that to the theater.
I haven't seen Schitt's Creek, so I can't comment on that.
Right, it's just a nice, evening comedy. And then you play those alongside your big movies. Maybe now you have more staying power than every weekend we have to make our money back, and it all hinges on these 2 movies because it's their opening weekend.
I might argue that, like, if you're going to say, like, the theater is dead, it's going to be dead for the same reason that Blockbuster Video died. Blockbuster Video didn't know how to offer things besides what it always did, and when issues showed up, and it's, for Blockbuster, it was streaming services, it was Comcast On Demand. It feels to me that what you're asking theaters to do is to expand what they are offering. What does it mean to just go out to a movie theater and watch a movie? Are you there just to pay for ticket, sit down, watch movie, and leave? Whereas, like, movie theaters, like, they're just hoping to kind of get as much money out of you via popcorn, beverages. But, like, what else could they do?
Right. I definitely think...
kind of... What else could they offer the viewer?
I definitely think there's going to need to be a lot of adapting. I don't think they can... I don't think they should go in the direction of, we're going to become just short of a theme park. Because those are... I mean, if you take the Blumhouse strategy, you make high-quality movies at low cost, right? That's what he's doing. He's making these, like, $50 million horror movies, essentially a drop in the bucket, and he's turning them around to make, like $125 million. And so I think that's what you have to do with theaters is, like, you can offer the expensive 3D, you can offer the high-end, the bar inside, you can offer the IMAX, but at the same time, like, maybe people are huge for nostalgia. Maybe you say, hey, it's just like Stranger Things and Ghostbusters. Come on down. It's like a mall. You watch a movie for a bit. You have the ability to maybe go in and out. And then you hang out at our concession stand, which now has, I don't know, some kind of arcade. Maybe this has all been done before. Maybe the trick is to do what Nolan did and go backwards. Nostalgia? I don't know. That's all I got.
Sure.
If you guys know the answer to this question, or maybe what you would want to see in the theaters in the future, maybe you have an idea of why they're failing, other than this global state we're in, let us know. I mean, I assume we'll have some sort of way to comment on this.
Who knows? Maybe.
Shout it out a window. We'll get it.
Stand at your door and say it directly to the...
shout at young people.
To the streets.
Shout it at the young people. We'll hear you. We hear you.
If you do plan to see a movie such as Tenet this October, remember, stay safe, wear a mask, and have a good time.